How do you see the stock market scenario in the India in the coming year?
The India economic story over the next 10 years is a one-way traffic, which is forward and upwards.
You had chess event as well, right?
Our brand ambassador is Vidit Gujarati, who was part of the Olympiad team. And somebody asked me, why do you support chess? And fun fact, in the lighter note, I said, if you look at the three superpowers in the world today, United States, China, and upcoming India, there is only one place where we beat both of them hollow. And that's the game of chess.
Have you ever thought of owning an IPL team since you're so passionate about cricket?
वीडियो देखने से पहले मेरी एक रिक्वेस्ट है आप सबसे। मैं YouTube एनालिटिक्स देख रहा था एंड वहाँ पर देखा कि 82.6% ऑफ माय ऑडियंस हु इज वाचिंग दिस कंटेंट हैज नॉट सब्सक्राइब टू द चैनल। अगर मैंने आपको थोड़ी सी वैल्यू प्रोवाइड की होगी एंड आपको अगर कंटेंट बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, आई रिक्वेस्ट ऑल ऑफ यू टू प्लीज हिट द सब्सक्राइब बटन सो दैट वी कैन ब्रिंग यू द बेस्ट क्वालिटी ऑफ गेस्ट एंड गिव यू द मैक्सिमम वैल्यू पॉसिबल। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर सब्सक्राइबिंग टू आवर चैनल एंड एंजॉय दिस एंटायर एपिसोड ऑफ कॉन्वर्सेशन विद कुशल। Hosting Mr. Ashok Wadhwa is just like stock markets, right? It's a lot of anticipation, some risk, and a lot of returns after the session is going to be over. But don't worry, unlike the markets, this podcast is not going to crash. So we are going to have a lot of fun here. And as you might have seen in the content, so I introduce all the guests with witty rhymes. So we have created like an amazing introduction for him through some witty rhymes, and here it goes. A bright spark in his eyes is what his parents saw. He is perfect example of Sharma ji ka beta as he has done CA, CS and law. He is an audacious person and has no fears. That's why he quit his high paying job after working for 14 years. He killed it in the industry and has gone way too far when he started his tax practice with Mr. Dinesh Kanabar. When he enters a new business, competitors used to think it's now going to be scary. His wife didn't like whenever he used to reply to emails early morning on his old BlackBerry. He loves red wine and every day has fixed number of meals. He's worked with Reliance Aditya Birla Group advising on billion-dollar deals. He used to play chess until his son started beating him and sometimes plays the King's Gambit. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Ashok Wadhwa, founder and group CEO of Ambit. Thank you so much, sir, for coming here. Hope you're doing well. And it means a lot that you've come all the way to guide all the finance enthusiasts.
Thank you, Kushal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Saturday evening, I'm sure you have many priorities, and you chose to come and be here with me, to hear a boring accountant, which is what I defined myself. Great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful introduction. The facts are pretty accurate. The poetic form is obviously beautiful, but I think if you go drill down to the facts, pretty accurate. I was born in what was then a large town, now a small town called Kanpur in UP. That's where I was born and brought up. That's where I did my early education, and then moved to Bombay and did my both school and college here. So here, I'm delighted. Kushal mentioned about my soft corner for chartered accountants. Absolutely right. Many people ask me, why did you begin Ambit? I said, because when I was a kid, I used to always think about how do people become IIT graduates and IIM, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Calcutta. For me, it was a dream. Never thought I could get there. And therefore, when I became a chartered accountant, I thought it was a good idea to start an institution which could employ a lot of IIMs. That way, what I couldn't achieve on my own, at least I could work with very intelligent people, and hopefully their capability would reflect upon me, and I would look more capable than I am. And that's really been part of my journey so far, ladies and gentlemen. So, more over to you.
That's super inspiring. I was studying through some of your interviews and we got to know that you and Ravi Shastri grew up in the same colony and you used to play cricket with him in your early childhood as well. So how was your early childhood, and if you can just talk about some of the anecdotes that have shaped your entire life which is helping you today in your career, that'll be helpful.
So for me, Ravi was never a great cricketer. Actually, as we grew up, I thought I was a better cricket player than Ravi was. This was during the days when Bedi and Prasanna used to be the kind of twin spinners for the Indian cricket team. And I was an off spinner, right-hand batsman, and Ravi was a left-arm spinner, also a good batsman. So he was kind of the Bedi of the team, and I was the Prasanna of the team. We grew up together in the same society. His father was my family doctor. He was a poor student. I was a very good student. He was an outstanding athlete. I was a so-so athlete. But it was great playing with him. There was one common thing between Ravi and me. We were very, very determined to succeed in whatever we did. We were together in grade 11 in Don Bosco High School, which is when we played extensive cricket together. And if you go back and look at, we used to have a teacher in our school called Sir Charles Farrow. Sir Charles Farrow was also the class teacher for Farokh Engineer, Shashi Kapoor, and many other luminaries from Indian celebratory group. And if Sir Charles Farrow used to have a practice at the end of every year, because that was the last year in school for all of us. He used to ask each one of us to write one page on what I want to be in life. And the great anecdote of life is that if you go back and look at Ravi's page, it'll say he wants to be a chartered accountant. And if you go back and look at my page, it'll say I want to be a cricketer. As luck may have it, we changed places. I learned cricket from him, and he learned accounting from me. And we both remain very good friends even today. We don't meet as often as we would like to meet, but whenever we meet, the old school, the childhood warmth emerges immediately. And the warm hug from Ravi, he's 6'3", I'm 5'6". So the warm hug from him is always very welcome, very welcome. He's a superhuman being, I have to tell you. I said a word about him that he was not a great cricketer, but I will tell you one thing. He was the most intelligent cricketer that I have ever seen. His read of the game was so good that he managed to graduate. Ravi Shastri began by default in the Indian cricket team because Dilip Doshi was injured in New Zealand. And he used to come bat at number 11. But he's the only individual who's batted at number 11 and hit centuries at number 1. He was also a very fine bowler. So a great cricketer, but a great reader of the game of cricket. I'm disappointed that he didn't lead India for many more games than he should have because he was an astute, very astute individual in the game of cricket.
That's a lovely analogy again. Let's talk about your professional career, and we got to know that you were one of the youngest partners at Arthur Andersen, and after working there for 14 years, you decided to quit your high-paying job. So did you have a backup plan in your mind that you're going to start Ambit, or had you already started that and then you got some reasonable success to quit your job? How was that entire phase?
It goes back to the point I made earlier, Vishal, that we tend to believe that pre-planning and deep planning and long-term planning is the only way to really build your career and become successful. Actually, my career is a series of things that happened by default. Very few happened by design. It was not my intention to become a chartered accountant. I actually always wanted to pursue an MBA. It so happened that, all my colleagues were appearing for CA entrance. So I appeared for CA entrance. I happened to get a rank in CA entrance, so I got motivated to go sign articles. Everybody in college used to do morning college and then go do their articles in the daytime. I qualified at a time when you could do CA and your undergrad at the same time. So I would go to the college in the morning and then I would do my articles during the day. I qualified as a chartered accountant. I didn't know who Arthur Andersen was. One fine day, I was taking a car ride. I used to live in Navjeevan Society, Mahim. My family still has a house there. I have a house in my name there. I find that to be a very lucky omen for me. That's one thing, deviating for a minute. I tend to keep things that I feel are lucky for me. So when I used to appear for my exams, I would wear the same t-shirt and the same jeans for the 7 days. And I would eat the same breakfast for the 7 days. A sense of comfort more than anything else. So, I used to live in Navjeevan Society, and I was taking a ride with a very famous lawyer called Suresh Talwar, who used to be a partner at Crawford Bailey. Uncle Talwar is still around and very capable and plays golf on a regular basis, although he must be approaching 90 now. And he said, why are you not thinking about joining Arthur Andersen? And my first question to him was, who is Arthur Andersen? And he said, it's a global firm, it's one of the largest firms in the world, and they have offices everywhere in the world. And my second question to him was, uncle, I have never traveled abroad. I have a great desire to travel overseas. Will they send me overseas? And he said, yeah. As a matter of fact, Arthur Andersen trains all its people in a common training place in Geneva. So you will get a chance to go to Geneva. And by God, that was the only reason I applied to Arthur Andersen. I was happy in my job at Hari Bhakti and Company. I applied to Arthur Andersen because I was told that they would send me abroad, and I had never traveled abroad. And this is the year 1983. I applied. I was fortunate. I joined as the second employee of Arthur Andersen in India. Very unfortunately, the person who joined before me, literally on the same day as I did, passed away very soon with an illness. And so I effectively became the first employee of Arthur Andersen in India. And that was a great 14-year journey. So again, coming back to what you asked, did I join Arthur Andersen by design? Absolutely no. I would lie to you if I said that if Arthur Andersen had said, no, we are not going to send you abroad, I would have probably never joined them. So I joined them by default. Did I leave Arthur Andersen by design? Absolutely not. I mean, I was happy, enjoying myself, doing well at Arthur Andersen. I was the managing partner at that time. And it so happened that the firm wanted me to relocate to Hong Kong. And my priorities were to remain in India. So I chose to step out of Arthur Andersen. And by sheer coincidence, met three wonderful people, Dinesh Kanabar, Gautam Doshi, and Ketan Dalal. And all of us together formed a firm called RSM. It used to be Ratan S. Mama and Company. We rechristened it to RSM. Why? Because every time I traveled to Delhi, people would say, Ashok Mama. Ashok Mama. I said, nahi bhai, Ashok Mama nahi hu main. I'm Ashok Wadhwa. Ratan Mama is the firm. So we said, no more Ratan Mama. We will change it to RSM. We will keep the goodwill of Mr. Mama, who was the founding partner of the firm. And we would make it a little more modern firm. So that's how RSM was born on 6th April 1997. And my three partners, Dinesh Kanabar, Gautam Doshi, Ketan Dalal, became co-partners and co-founders of RSM. And the rest is really all, as I said, a series of fortunate blessings by God, more than anything else.
There was also a news article when you had quit Arthur Andersen, right? I think it was covered in the media houses, and that was also there in the news.
So I had three firsts to my name. I think I was the youngest partner when I made partner in Arthur Andersen. Nobody had, I think, breached the 30-year age, and I became a global partner just before 30. The other two things, some to be proud of, some not so to be proud of, is I was the first chartered accountant to be covered on the cover page of Business India. In 1987, Business India decided to do a cover on the highest paid professionals in the country at that time. And remember, in 1987, I was all of 26, 27. And I found myself on the cover page as one of the highest paid professionals in India. My father, who passed away 2 years ago, had an old habit. He would preserve every single article in which my photograph appeared. And as I was going through some of the collections that he had done over the years, after he passed away 2 years ago, I actually found that magazine. So I still have a copy of that magazine as a collectible for my own collection now. So that was 1987. And then, of course, in 1997, when I decided to leave Arthur Andersen, I was quite surprised by the coverage. It was, center page, front page, center article. Front page, center article. I mean, remember, those days there was not so much to write. I mean, now, there is so much to write about which company is, developing new AI and which company is receiving new funding and green energy and everything else, that perhaps that article wouldn't have found a place now. But in those days, perhaps because there was not much to be written, I actually found my name in the centerpiece as Wadhwa quits Anderson. So it was big news at that point of time. I had not realized the importance of that news until I actually saw the newspaper. And then it kind of dawned on me that maybe I took a stupid decision. Maybe I should have continued, because if newspapers thought that that news was worthy of being written front page, then maybe I was doing something wrong here. But by that time I had taken the decision, so there was no going back after that.
So the practice that you started of RSM, that ultimately got merged with PwC, and then you also decided to start something in the financial services industry. So can you walk us through your framework, that how did you start all these financial services companies, be it investment banking, institutional equities, etc., and what was the framework and the thesis behind starting them?
So, as I said, RSM started in September of 1997. And just around that, I used to do a lot of work for a private equity fund called Warburg Pincus, legendary firm, of course, one of the best in the world. And the then head of Asia Pacific, who went on to become the CEO, Chip Kay, and the head of international for the firm at that time, who since retired, Dalip Pathak, happened to be two very good friends. And they came back to me and they said, listen, you've done lots of work for us during your days in Anderson's. We don't have a physical presence here in India. Why don't you set up a subsidiary and, help identify transactions for us? And that's how really Ambit was born, as a subsidiary to RSM. So the four founders of RSM kind of co-funded and set up Ambit as a subsidiary. And we continued working in that fashion, with Ambit doing some form of advisory work, largely for financial sponsors, private equity funds at that point of time. Warburg being, of course, primary amongst them. And that continued through till 2004. In 2004, I think the team at Ambit got a little more ambitious, given the big opportunity in the advisory space, in the investment banking advisory space. And we recruited 3 partners from Lazard. And that was a big move, because Lazard was then, truly blue-blooded, global, multinational, established here in India. And 3 of their partners, including their managing partner, shifted from Lazard to Ambit as a part of rebuilding the Ambit investment banking franchise. That happened around 2003, 2004. And by 2007, it was obvious that the accountants were more committed towards being a part of Big Four, and the investment bankers were more committed towards building a full-service investment banking firm. It's a rare case where an accounting firm like RSM, with almost 350 people, separated from Ambit, the investment bank. And the separation was absolutely clean. The separation was without any struggle. It was a completely seamless separation between the two firms. RSM went on to merge with Price Waterhouse, and since then many of my former colleagues have gone to lead Big Four firms. So there was a point of time when the head of taxes for all the four firms, Price Waterhouse, KPMG, Deloitte, and EY, was a former Anderson or a former RSM colleague who had worked with me at some point of time in the past. And even today, I would think that a very large part of the leadership of the Big Four is constituted by individuals who had some connection with either Arthur Andersen or RSM. So Dinesh Kanabar went on to create his own firm. Ketan Dalal created his own firm. Gautam Doshi's got his own firm. And Ambit separated and became a standalone entity. The building that now is Ambit House, just half a kilometer from here, was then called Ambit RSM House. But post this event on 24th of April 2007, the Ambit RSM House became Ambit House, and Ambit started building itself as a standalone entity.
So how did you compete with the global giants in the investment banking space, and was there any differentiating factor that you had in your mind when launching the investment banking business?
There's one thing I have always thrived in. I actually enjoy competition. And I enjoy being the underdog in the competition. For a very long time, as I sat in the big office in Arthur Andersen as the managing partner, I systematically, kind of competed with, overrode, to some extent even decimated, the smaller, mid-sized, and sometimes even larger accounting firms. I took great pride in saying that we began at a time when Pricewaterhouse and Ferguson were giants in the accounting business in India. And Arthur Andersen, in a space of 10 years, went on to become 2-3 times the size of these, 100-year-old institutions. But when I moved to the other side, first at RSM and then in Ambit, it somehow gave me extraordinary pleasure to be competing with the larger, well-established boys and getting a sense and feeling that I was building a team which was quite capable of not just competing, but winning mandates against these large institutions. When we built RSM, we were very proud to say that it was as competitive, as good, and served as many multinationals, any of the other big four. And we tried to follow the same example when we created Ambit. The focus was on doing quality work. The focus was always on using intellectual capability, recruiting people who believed that ideation is the way to build business. Business in our industry, in the financial services industry, you get all types. You get very strong salespeople, you get very strong research-oriented people, and you get people who use their intellectual bandwidth to kind of push their sales capability. And that's the type of institution I always wanted to build. So in a sense, the fact that we are the underdogs has never ever discouraged me from going out and competing with the best in the class. I actually believe that it's because of that spirit we go out and recruit the best in class people. And if you look at Ambit today, each of my business heads at some point of time or the other has spent quality number of years in working for a large multinational institution. And they come join a domestic house. And as I said, we compete on equal terms. And we win as many as we lose. So I'm not saying that we win everything. We lose as many as we win, and we win as many as we lose. But there is a satisfaction in saying that coming out of nowhere, you build a brand that can now compete with the best in class institutions in the country.
That's super helpful. And just like diverting a bit to macroeconomics as well. I watched one of your interviews where you said that you recently traveled to Japan and Korea, and there was one interaction where people who are in Japan and Korea, they're also very bullish on the Indian economy. So you travel to a lot of countries. So how are these countries looking at the Indian economy, and what are people thinking about the India story?
One of the most gratifying experiences of my life is really the past 3 years, post-COVID in particular. I've been in this business of wanting and attracting foreign investment into India, both as a part of my profession, and I've also done it as a part of effort from both professional bodies like Bombay Chambers, FICCI, and when I was on the board of Advantage India. Here is what I will say to you, is that there has been a dramatic change in the way India and Indians are perceived, particularly in the last 5-7 years. Indians have already made their mark on the global scene. When you talk about Sundar Pichai and you talk about, everybody else who's running global companies, Ajay Banga, Indians have already established themselves as, supremely capable individuals across not just banking and financial services, which is where they first made their mark, but manufacturing and now, of course, technology. India as a destination was never seen as an attractive destination. For most of the period, I would say until 2017, we had to pretty much request for meetings. And at points of time, the request used to actually move towards plead for meetings. So when I traveled abroad on one of my road shows, I would have to say, Neni, please do give me a meeting. I have something new to tell you. Because the question people would ask is there something new, or is it the same old India where lots of promises, lots of vision, but not adequate execution? I have to say that in the last 7 years, in particular last 5 years, there's been a dramatic change. Today, you don't have to sell the India story. And I was giving this example to somebody, very interesting example. I was invited to go make a pitch in Dubai for an IPO to a very large consumer company. IPO will get announced very soon. And when I went to see this family in their offices in Dubai, they said, do you have half an hour to meet a friend of ours? So I said, sure. He's a neighbor of ours in Dubai. So there comes a gentleman. Who's this gentleman? He's from Djibouti, born in Djibouti. He's a French national who lives in Dubai. And what was his request? His request was, I want to invest in India. So a typical of me, when I met him, I started talking about the India story. And he said, listen, you don't have to tell me anything about India. I've decided, please tell me how, show me the vehicle by which I can put 5 million to begin with and 50 million eventually in stock market in India. I want to invest in India. Now, that's something I had not seen in the longest part of my career. And whereas I'm giving you this one simple example, there was another example, very interesting example. You know, my family is also joint venture partners with two of the brands in the Kering group, Gucci and Saint Laurent. And I was meeting the store manager of Gucci, the general manager of Gucci in Korea, in Seoul. This is a French national who works in Seoul. And when I went to see him and ask him how was Gucci doing in Korea, his first question to me was, can you tell me about the Indian stock market? I believe it's a very attractive destination to put capital. Can I, as a French national working in Korea, invest in India? Now, these are not common instances, as I said, in my long-drawn career. But India has become a very attractive destination, and for good reasons. I'm not suggesting that we don't have our own set of economic challenges. We do. But if I look at the world around and say, which is the one place that continues to demonstrate immense potential for growth and consistent growth and compounding growth over the next 10 years, I would say India is certainly one of those jurisdictions. I'm not saying it's the only jurisdiction. I would say it is certainly one of those jurisdictions. So the India story is now a self-told story. You don't have to go sell India to anybody. It's a story that is well sold. It's now a question of, can we frame rules and policies that facilitate? Can we really translate ease of doing business in India into true ease of doing business in India? And if we can, there is no dearth of capital waiting to come to this country. No dearth.
And is there any specific sector or theme that you are bullish upon as far as the next 5 years or a decade is concerned in the Indian economy?
So generally the sectors that we continue to feel very positive about are consumption-driven sectors, including credit-driven sectors. So remain bullish on BFSI, although I know that one segment within that, the non-banking finance companies, particularly those that are lending to unsecured sectors, unsecured loans, and particularly those that are in the microfinance or short-term personal loan category, are going through some stress at this point of time. But generally, banking financial services is a very good sector. Generally, consumption is a very good sector. But the two that I would like to talk about today are manufacturing and digital growth and AI development in India. There's a very interesting article that appeared, I think it was on this Monday, the Monday that went by, in Economic Times by a gentleman called Vivek Wadhwa, no relative of mine. I know him well. I meet him. He's a super genius. He's an absolute super genius. Please do, youngsters, please do track Vivek Wadhwa and his writings. He is really a futuristic thinker in that sense. And he wrote a very interesting article on how US's visa rules are going to result in reverse brain drain. According to him, it has already begun. He's also been invited by, I think, the IIT Madras, Chennai, to come and be a lecturer there or be a part-time faculty there. But more importantly, what he is saying, and I tend to believe him to be right, is that whereas US has led, we don't talk about China because we really don't have enough information on what China is doing. But let's not underestimate the power of China and the work that China is doing in terms of artificial intelligence and creating next level of intellectual capital. But the work that the US was doing, which was really cutting edge, a lot of that work is relocating to Bangalore and to India. I would like to believe that unlike in the technology space, where India got the lower end of the value chain by just doing body shopping, when it comes to developments in the AI space, India is capable and India has already recognized its competitive position, and India will continue to develop cutting edge technology. So I would argue and say that in the larger AI space, India will demonstrate phenomenal execution capability and will lead. It's just a matter of time. In the next 3-5 years, you will see how it develops. After all, quick commerce was born in India, right? I mean, e-commerce may have been born in the United States, but quick commerce was born in India, and the rest of the world will see the impact of that quick commerce. The second one is manufacturing. I continue to believe this government, its policy making is very heavily thrust in favor of course, infrastructure, but also manufacturing. I also believe that the China Plus strategy that has been evolved post-COVID works very beneficial interest in India. But I think what will now top everything is the Trump legislation. I personally believe that whereas Trump will probably levy duties across board, there will be penal consequences of importing from China and related countries. He's not going to limit it to China. He's going to extend it to Cambodia. He's going to extend it to Vietnam, because he knows that China actually operates through these other satellite countries. And unfortunately, with the developments in Bangladesh, I say unfortunately because they have been a wonderful neighbor for us. Read the article this morning in Business Standard by Shekhar Gupta. Very, very good article. My own belief is that given the developments in Bangladesh, India and Indian textile manufacturing is going to be a huge beneficiary. So the Trump legislations on one side and the developments in Bangladesh on the other side effectively means within the manufacturing sector, textile manufacturing will get a serious leg up as we move forward in the next few years.
A lot of people would be asking you about the stock markets and whether to invest in the Indian markets, etc. And this was like one of the questions when I had also mentioned that I would be interviewing you as well. I wouldn't ask you, of course, any stock specific tip as such. But what I want to ask is, like, how do you see the stock market scenario in the India in the coming year? Like, is there a crash? Is there a recovery? Like, what do you expect in general?
So my normal response to a question like this would be, I'll get my colleague Nitin Basin, who's an expert on the subject. He's the head of our equities business. He runs a very, very good equities business. Would be the right person to answer this question. But let me try and articulate my own response. As I said, I don't really study markets in as much detail as my other colleagues do with that qualification. I think the Indian market had moved a little ahead of itself. Some of the economic slowdown that we are reading about is obviously going to have an impact on the market. My own view is that the India economic story over the next 10 years cannot be questioned, should not be questioned, and is a one-way traffic, which is forward and upwards. And if I read that the market movement should be in conjunction with the economic development in any country or the economic growth in any country, then the trajectory of the Indian market cannot be any way other than the way the Indian economy moves, which is, forward and upwards. So I remain relatively bullish on the Indian market over the next 5, 7, 10 years. In this interim period, are there going to be periods of volatility? Absolutely, yes. You're going through some of it right now. There will be times when microeconomic factors and sometimes macroeconomic factors will have impact, certainly on certain segments. I gave you the examples of lending business, NBFCs. If you are in the unsecured space today, if you are in microfinance today, if you are in short-term personal loan category today, there is headwinds, serious headwinds, because the economy, the economic trajectory at the lower end of the economy is struggling a little. And you can see that in extended delinquencies, and you can see that on pressure on stocks of these companies. So short-term volatility will happen. It will happen either industry specific, it can of course always happen company specific, but generally I would continue to believe that India is in a good space and the compounding story in India over the next 5-7 years should not be questioned. I have some concerns, whereas I remain very bullish on infrastructure and real estate because of government spending and private capital spending. I remain a little concerned about consumer demand. Volumes are still not stacking up, and therefore in the short term there could be some volatility in that space too.
So last question from my side before we take the questions from the audience. If a young 22, 23-year-old wants to start their own business in the financial services industry, what advice would you have for them?
Let me start with myself first. If I was a 22-year-old today, what would I do? I would actually go back to doing exactly what I did. There is merit in working for an institution. Medium or large, I don't say. Small, medium or large, I don't say. But an institution. Because when you are a youngster and you haven't still experienced all the headwinds that will come, headwinds will come regardless. People and organizations have a habit of going through good times and bad times. It happens to everybody. An institutional training allows you to experience some of these without necessarily getting injured seriously. Some injury will happen, a little tear here, a little tear there. We don't want to be worried like we are worried about Bumrah right now. Back spasms and back trouble. I mean, ace cricketer of ours. So we don't want back spasms to be happening to us. So I would say that working in an institution for a short period of time, you can define short as 5 years, 7 years. I decided to do 14 years. I'm a great believer in the Ramayana. So I spent 14 years doing it. So you can decide that period. But training in an institution will prepare you for tough times. So that would be my first piece of advice. And then, of course, as you venture out, there are 2 or 3 things I must share with you. When I left Arthur Andersen, I thought, I used to carry a card called Ashok Wadhwa, Managing Partner, Arthur Andersen. I left with the wrong impression. I thought the power was in Ashok Wadhwa. Actually, that was completely misconceived. It is only after I left that I realized that nobody wanted to know Ashok Wadhwa. The power was in the title, Managing Partner, Arthur Andersen. The very people that I went to see, the very people who would come to see me often, they were absolutely not available. I could hunt them down, but none of them would be willing to meet me. So I think it's important to be realistic. It's important to set your expectations real. And so I was in for a rude shock. When I left Arthur Andersen and I started my own firm, I was in for a rude shock but then the other interesting experience is that help will come from quarters you least expect. And I cannot but mention 2 people here for whom I'm most grateful. One was Deepak Parekh. I mean, I knew him. Everybody knows him. Every youngster used to go see him at that point of time. But when I went to see him and I told him what I needed, I got a 2 crore check from him just on a written request letter. And if I had not got those 2 crores, I'm not sure whether I would have been strong enough to start the firm. So that was an important piece. As I said, he's been a basket of generosity for everybody. But the fact that and this is 1997. There was a lot of money in 1997. It's still a lot of money. But in 1997, it was a serious sum of money. And the other is my friend, Manoj Modi. I didn't expect anything from him. I just happened to go see him. And his question to me was, what's going to be your first year's expense? And I said, I think I'm going to incur approximately a cost of 1 crore as an expense in the first year. And next day I had a retailer contract of 1 crore on my table. And this again is 1997, which is a large sum of money in that period of time. So I had known him, I had respected them, but help will come from quarters that you least expect. And these are two visible names, so it's easy to relate to them. But there are other quarters from which help came, less known people. And there are many well-known people who promised help, but help won't come. So be honest to yourself, be realistic, set your expectations right. Very important. Continue with perseverance. I think resilience is the other factor that you need. I mean, you will fall repeatedly, but you have to have the courage to say, this is not the end, I will stand up. I have absolutely no doubts that Bumrah will come banging again. I have no doubts about it, that he'll be back again in Champions Trophy getting wickets for us. That's resilience. You need to be resilient about it. And as I said, don't set too many objectives here. Problem with youngsters is that too many of them want to become very famous and very rich very fast. There is no shortcut. There is no shortcut to becoming famous, and there is no shortcut to becoming rich. You have to take the long route. That is the only route to success. Hard work, dedication, sincerity, very strong work ethics, and very strong principles by which you abide in your life. I would say that would be my guidance to all of you.
That's so good. I mean, that's like a very wonderful end to this conversation as well. Thank you so much. Like, this was very insightful. We'll open the forum for audience Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I'll request you to raise your hands, and then I'll ask my colleague to give the mic. Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Dwarkesh Agrawal. I have two questions. First is, I'm a big fan of Saurav Mukherjee. How did you get to hire him? And second is, bit regarding the changing world global order. We see today the rising Russia, the expansionist. The same is the case with China and the USA, trying to, they just topple the government in the Canada and want Denmark, Greenland, part of Denmark, Canada, Israel, planning to execute the greater Israel. In Bangladesh, there has been instances that it has been done because of the US, not liking the previous governments. And so do you think it is going to affect the changing global world order? How do you see that in the next 5 to 10 years, where wars are being prolonged for so long and everything is changing so fast? Thank you.
So let me talk about Saurabh for a minute. Again, Saurabh came into my lap. I mean, honestly, one fine day, a young man walked into Ambit House and said, "Can I meet with you?" And he had a team, he had a bright idea, incredibly intelligent individual, incredibly hardworking individual. And I think Ambit was blessed that somebody like Saurabh came in to help build our equities business. We owe a lot to him in terms of the character of the equities business that Ambit practices today. If we take pride in our research, we need to thank him for that. And if we say that we've built a world-class equities business, we need to also include him in that thank you. So as I said, he came to my organization purely by default, not by design. To your question on volatility in the world, I think geopolitical management is going to be one of the most critical factors for nations to succeed in the next, certainly decade, but perhaps the next millennium. There was a time when economic growth was a determining factor. There was a time when intellectual capability was the determining factor. I think there is a time now when geopolitical management will be the determining factor. And guess what? We are blessed. Because we probably have the finest leader in the world in management of geopolitics in our country today, our Prime Minister. I mean, there's nobody who has managed geopolitics better than him. We have relationship with Russia, we have relationship with Ukraine, we have relationship with Israel, we have relationship with Iran, we have relationships across board, we have relationships with US, and we are also managing to neutralize some hostility with China. So I would say managing geopolitics is going to be a very, very important factor going forward. I think the world order has changed. From the world that was starting to think global, we are now in a world which is thinking more local. the pegging order is what is good for my country is good for me, and what is good for my country is good for the world. And that's how the world is thinking about it. So the old concept of what is good for the world is good for the country has changed completely. What is good for the country is good for the world. And on a lighter note, I was sharing this with somebody. Somebody asked me yesterday, we support the game of chess extensively. And our brand ambassador is Vidit Gujarati, who was part of the Olympiad team. And somebody asked me, why do you support chess? And fun fact, in the lighter note, I said, if you look at the three superpowers in the world today, United States, China, and upcoming India, there is only one place where we beat both of them hollow, and that's the game of chess. India's chess fraternity is going to rule the world. And if that fraternity at some stage converts into India's true intellectual bandwidth, well, we'll certainly rule the world again. So the next millennium, as I said, belongs to India.
Yesterday, I think you had that chess event as well, right? At the office.
Yeah. We had, what we didn't know yesterday was so Vidit was playing 18 boards with the last 6 boards blindfolded, right? And one of the 18 participants was an 8-year-old girl. This 8-year-old girl, her parents had traveled 500 kilometers from interior Maharashtra to bring her to Bombay to play Vidit Gujarati. She's Asia number 1. She's Asia number 1. She can't speak English. She speaks only Hindi and Marathi. She's Asia number 1. And more importantly, she has no financial support for training. She's Asia number 1 without support. So she's going to be our next brand ambassador.
Wow. That's very touching. Can we have the next question? Yeah, please, that's it.
Hello, I'm Tushar. I run my own executive search firm Basil. My question is that in any advisory business, if you were to grow the business, you need partners, right? So how did you go about incentivizing the first 10 important hires at Ambit? Like if you have any specific insights to share on that.
Listen, in people's business, it's your intellectual bandwidth that eventually matters, right? And first identifying, then recruiting, and then retaining talent is critical, absolutely critical.
As a matter of fact, in many businesses, and let me take 2 specific businesses for you. Asset management business. Today, in asset management business, if you lose long-serving fund managers, you really run the risk of investors pulling back their money, particularly large institutional investors. So it's very important to create a longevity of the institution, but longevity also for career of individuals who work with you. I don't think there is any magical formula by which you recruit and retain good people. Part of it comes by your own goodwill. And again, going back to the 2 words, trust and respect, whether people can trust you and they respect you for who you are. Part of it comes by way you empower people. And leaders today have to be fully empowered. Gone are those days when any one individual could build an institution purely on his own strength. I take great pride in saying that I'm probably amongst the less important people that work at Ambit today. And there are 10, 12, 14 leaders that have built the businesses of Ambit singularly in their domain, of course with their own teams. Here is what I will say, is that the biggest challenge pure advisory businesses have, it could be law firm, it could be accounting firm, it could be investment banking advisory firms. The pure challenge advisory firms have today is that talent is very, very fast moving. And aspirations of people are moving even faster than people are moving. So you have a real challenge in being able to retain people from a long-term perspective. which is perhaps one of the reasons we realized that, when we were thinking about in 2007, when RSM separated from Ambit, the debate for us was, do we build a deeper investment banking franchise, a la Rothschild, or do we, at that time it was also Lazard, or do we build a more broad-based full-service investment bank? And we chose to go the full broad-based investment bank perspective because we realized that access to capital and access to fund flow are critical barriers to be able to build a long-term sustainable and competitive business. If capital is not a critical need for your business, then it's very easy to lose your franchise. But if capital is critical to your business, if ability to raise money, in the asset management business, there's an old saying, everything else is cheap. The guy who has access to capital funds is the king. Everything else. Fund managers are very important. Without their performance, you don't have the enablement to raise funds. But really, the kingpin in that business is the person who has access to distribution and fundraise. And therefore, in businesses where either capital, like the lending business, or sometimes even the equities business, where capital or fundraise is important, that becomes one glue to be able to create it. So we chose to go broad-based, and that's worked well for us, because when you create strong allies in equities business, in ECM business, in asset management, and create a platform that can cross-sell, then you are also able to retain your talent on the investment banking side, because they see the ability to cross-sell across the platform as a huge competitive edge. So I would say broad-basing yourself is a good idea, versus just building a pure advisory business.
How many years after the investment banking business did you start the second business?
So in our current avatar, we started in 2007 when RSM separated. And between 2007 and 2016, I had added equities, I had added asset management, I had added structured lending. Wealth was the last one, which got added in 2019. So within a space of 6 years, I think we began 4 businesses. 24 months. Just needed time to settle down, raise some capital, and we were off to the races. But if you look at some of the new players, Neo being one example, or Incred being the other example, 2 people, they have moved even faster because they've raised capital. I'm a little old school, so I didn't want to dilute myself too fast, which in hindsight may have been an error, because we could have been a larger institution had I diluted myself too fast. So I was, as I said, old school, and perhaps some lesson for the younger generation, that don't worry about dilution. I think greater pleasure is in building size and strength in the platform.
So how big is the total team at Ambit across all the businesses?
So we are approximating about 3,000 people in all.
Wow.
Out of which about 2,500 are just in our lending business. Okay. That's the biggest, 200 branches. And 500 sit in otherwise, about 160 in our wealth business, 120 odd in our equities business, 70 odd in our investment banking business, and 70 odd in our asset management business. And also, interestingly, I can share with you that perhaps not.
Yeah, we'll have the next question. Yes, please.
Sir, there is no one better than you to answer this. And we want you to, if you can help us double click. So all of us in the room have faced situations where, we have to deal with seemingly tough guy, right? Who is very tough, who is not ready to listen to anything. But you have to get things moving, right? If you can give us some examples, help us understand how do you navigate situations with tough people in the room, and how do you get things moving? If you can give some insights around that, I think that would be really helpful for everyone.
So, I think it's a very good question, but perhaps to a wrong person, because I'm not known to be the toughest person in Ambit. So, as I said, I'm not known to be the toughest person. As a matter of fact, one of our virtues in Ambit, values in Ambit, is compassion. And people often ask me whether compassion is a reflection of my own weakness in taking hard decisions. And I keep reiterating to people that that's not the case. Compassion is not a weakness. Compassion is actually a strength. Compassion is ability to understand human problems and relate to them and be able to deal with them in a human manner versus in a high-handed manner. But to your question, how do you deal with tough people? How do you deal with difficult people? Again, I think the first important virtue is patience. You can't let your first impression about anybody lead you to action, because people have a habit of creating first external impression and perhaps a little different from what they actually are. So my first suggestion to everybody is, don't judge anybody too soon, particularly your colleagues. You can judge your clients very soon and decide whether you want to work or not work for them. But when it comes to your colleagues, don't judge anybody too soon. Everybody has a right to be treated fairly and given an extended period of time. But then there comes a situation where a bully shows himself to be a bully. And then you have to deal with him in a hard-nosed manner. And hard-nosed manner doesn't mean impolite manner. I always say that the manner is more important. The action is more important than the consequence. How you deal with a person is more important than the message that you deliver to him eventually. And we try and use that as a common mechanism across our organization. Never be rude, remain polite, never do it in public, always call him in the room. So I never fire anybody in public. If I have to fire him, I'll always call him in the room and then fire him. Because let his own self-pride be maintained. We have a saying in Ambit that every departing individual is an ambassador of the organization. And we want to treat him exactly that way. His period after you ask him to go or after he has resigned has to be a wonderful period so that he carries home wonderful memories. We're one of the few institutions that actually does an alumni dinner every year. When I write to all the alumni of Ambit and ask them to come and have cocktails with us and join us for an evening drink, and it's wonderful camaraderie. It's simply wonderful camaraderie. It's nice to see how people forget all their grievances and come and be a part of the same institution. So, to your question, when you have to deal with a tough situation, you have to deal with a tough situation. Deal with it politely, deal with it respectfully, but deal with it firmly and decisively.
Have you ever thought of owning an IPL team since you're so passionate about cricket?
First, I can't afford it. I've been a banker.
This is modesty.
No, I've been a banker to a few IPL teams. I can tell you, I've advised people on buying and selling of IPL teams. We were advisors to Sunrisers when they bought Deccan. We received mandates from at least 2 other teams in trying to help them find buyers stroke investors. So I've been a banker to IPL teams. But honestly, it's too expensive. Sometimes I feel that the vanity quotient is a little too high. I don't belong there, so I'm happy watching the game. I'm happy going and sitting in the stadium. And given that many teams are owned by people with whom one has done work, and some of them also happen to be friends, you get good tickets any which way to these games. So then why do I have to own a team for that? I don't have to. But as I said, we are passionate about chess. Yeah. And, if there was a chess league that came up, we would certainly think about supporting that league with a couple of players. Because I think it's a great game. It's a royal game.
Yeah. We'll take the last question in the interest of time. So yeah, we'll take the last one. Yes.
Ambit Group is close to 20 years old, more than 20 years old.
I am going to ask Ravi Kapoor to come to my office and answer that question one day. But no, it's not a question that we don't debate. Honestly, I'm a conservative individual, right? I'm a chartered accountant, so you have to be conservative. That's what accountants are taught. Be conservative. So I'm a conservative individual. I think IPO is, many people treat IPO as an opportunity. My views are very different. It's a responsibility, not an opportunity. The only business that's large enough for being an IPO-able candidate, in my view, because you have to be large enough, you have to have a minimum size, profitability, sustainability to be able to. These are great times, but as I said, great times are followed by weak times, and that's the law of nature. Weak times will come. The only business that can do IPO is the Ambit, the APL, Ambit Private Limited, which is our investment bank and which also holds ownership everywhere else. But equally, I feel strongly about the fact that an investment bank should never do an IPO. It's a lumpy business. It's not a business that can manage quarter-to-quarter earnings and can demonstrate sustainable, consistent growth year after year. I have no doubts that our lending business at some stage will get to a size and we'll have to do an IPO. So you should only do an IPO for one of the three reasons. One, because you need capital. And an NBFC needs capital, so they will need to do an IPO for sure. Second, because more than one family member is involved in the business and you need to create, amicable separation for the future. So an unlisted company, and we've read some of these, right? Where family companies have gone through a little difficult, challenging period because the holding company was an unlisted company. I don't have that situation. And the third reason that you need to do an IPO is so that you create value for all your colleagues and employees in the organization. We have a strategic shareholder. Daiwa owns 23% of Ambit. And, between Daiwa and me and the company, we have enough ability to be able to provide exit to anybody who wishes to liquidate or monetize their shares. We've done that. In the last, between July of 2023 and November of 2024, in a space of 18 months, we have done 4 liquidity events at different parts of Ambit and given back in excess of 600 crores to shareholders by way of liquidity. So we have that ability. So I'm not sure we need to do an IPO. Now, there's always a temptation. So never say no, never say never. Who knows?
Thank you so much for this wonderful interaction. One last question from my side. This is a tricky one. If you were in the shoes of Kushal Lodha and if you were interviewing Mr. Ashok Wadhwa, what is one question you would like to ask him towards the end of the interview?
Have you thought about your career after Ambit?
Have you thought of your career after Ambit?
It's an interesting question. I believe that, like good cricketers, good leaders must also find the right age and stage to say au revoir. So I'm not somebody who will stick around until somebody else has to tell me your time is over. But I consult with a couple of friends, one of whom I'll name here on the camera, Egon Zender, old colleague of mine from Egon Zender, Govind Iyer. And I went to consult with him, and Govind made a very telling point to me. He said, Ashok, before you start thinking about you want to step down, first create an equally passionate alternate opportunity. Because where very engaging people step down from what they do and enjoy, their first passion, they become vegetables if they have not created an alternate interest which can occupy them equally. So I'm in that journey of trying to find out what my next passion is. And the day I find that out, I'll come on your studio again and tell you what my passion is, and that will be the day of Arua.
We'll do another podcast maybe next year or a few years down the line. But thank you so much for doing this. This was super insightful. We had an amazing time. And I'll just request my colleague to get the hamper. We have a small hamper for you. अगर आपको ये वीडियो पसंद आया होगा तो आई रिक्वेस्ट यू टू शेयर इट विद ऑल योर फ्रेंड्स एंड सब्सक्राइब टू आवर चैनल सो दैट वी कैन गिव यू मोर वैल्यू एडिटिव कंटेंट इन द शॉर्टेस्ट अमाउंट ऑफ टाइम. हमको ये बताइए कि आपको कौन से काइंड ऑफ गेस्ट चाहिए, हमको ये बताइए कि कौन से क्वेश्चंस मुझे नहीं पूछने चाहिए थे, कौन से क्वेश्चंस मुझे और पूछने चाहिए थे ताकि आपको और ज़्यादा वैल्यू मिल सके, और कौन से ऐसे पार्ट्स हैं जो आपको बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं आए ताकि हम लोग ये पार्ट स्ट्रीम कर सके फ्यूचर एपिसोड्स में. सो थैंक यू सो मच वंस अगेन फॉर वॉचिंग दिस एपिसोड एंड कीप शेयरिंग ऑल आवर एपिसोड्स विद योर फ्रेंड्स एंड कीप गिविंग अस फीडबैक so that we can improve and come up with better quality content.